Welcome to Nightmare Files, where real horror and chilling mysteries come to life. From eerie footage to unsettling stories, prepare for nightmares you won't forget. Should have never gone inside. That hospital was never meant to be entered again. It started as a dumb idea, a thrill-seeking challenge. Me, Kyle, and Rachel had heard the stories. An abandoned hospital on the edge of town. Closed down years ago, something about missing patients, something about doctors who didn't follow protocol. But it was just a building, right? Just an empty, forgotten place. At least that's what we thought. The front doors were chained shut. But Kyle had found another way in, a broken window on the side. We climbed through, landing in a hallway covered in dust. The air smelled stale, like something had been rotting for years. The walls were lined with old gurneys. Some still had straps attached. "This place is a nightmare," Rachel whispered. She had no idea how right she was. Kyle held up his phone, recording everything. "All right, guys, welcome to St. Mary's Hospital," he said in a mock announcer voice. "Tonight we're hunting ghosts. Let's see if they show up." His voice echoed. Too much. Like the building wasn't empty. Like something else was listening. Then the security camera above us flickered. For a brief second, the red recording light turned on. Rachel grabbed my arm. "Tell me that camera isn't working." Kyle laughed. "No power, remember? It's probably just old wiring." But as we turned to walk down the hallway, the camera moved, tracking us, following us. And in the static-filled security feed, we weren't alone. The deeper we went into the hospital, the worse it felt. The air was thick, heavy with dust and something else, and something old. Like the walls themselves were watching us. Rachel pulled a folder from the floor, brushing off layers of dust. "Patient files," she muttered. "Most of these are over 50 years old." She flipped through the pages, then stopped. Her eyes narrowed. Someone had written something in the margins, scribbled notes, messy, frantic. Over and over in red ink, "Do not let them leave." "Did you hear that?" Kyle whispered. We all froze. There it was again. Footsteps, slow, deliberate. Coming from deeper inside the hospital. But there was no one else here. There wasn't supposed to be. The lights overhead flickered. For just a moment, the hallway was plunged into darkness. Then when the lights came back on, Rachel gasped. At the far end of the hallway, a door was open. It hadn't been before. And beyond that door was only darkness. Kyle pointed up at the ceiling. The security camera was still there, still tracking us. Only this time, the screen wasn't just showing us. There was something else. A shape, a shadow, standing just beyond that open door. Watching. had only been inside for 15 minutes, but already, it felt like we had been there for hours, like something didn't want us to leave. Kyle stopped walking. "Guys," he whispered, "why does it sound like there's someone else walking with us?" Rachel and I froze. The footsteps didn't stop. For every step we took, there was another, a fraction of a second behind us. But when we turned around, the hallway was empty. Then we heard something else. A squeaking noise, slow, mechanical. We turned to look. A wheelchair sitting in the center of the hallway. It hadn't been there before, and it was moving, just a few inches, but enough for us to see it. Enough to know something had pushed it. Then a door opened, not fully, just a crack. A room at the end of the hallway, the inside was pitch black. Kyle lifted his flashlight, aiming it toward the open door. "Maybe it's just the wind," he started. But we all knew better. There was no wind. There was no reason for that door to open on its own. Rachel pointed up at the security camera. It was flickering again, but this time it wasn't tracking us. It was focused on something else. Something just beyond the doorway. A figure, standing in the darkness, watching us. Something was wrong. The hallway had changed. Or maybe it had always been this way, and we were just now noticing. "Do you feel that?" Rachel whispered. I nodded. The air had gotten colder, heavier, like we had just stepped into something we weren't supposed to. Then we all froze. At the far end of the hallway, a door was opening. Not quickly, not all at once. It was creeping open, like something on the other side was watching us first, then inviting us in. Nope. Kyle took a step back, and then the wheelchair moved. Not a big movement, just a few inches forward, but enough for us to all see it. Enough to know it wasn't the wind. Something had pushed it. Before anyone could speak, bang! A gurney flew into the wall, crashing against it with an echoing slam. Rachel screamed, jumping back. But there was no one near it. No one but us. Kyle pointed at the security camera. It was shaking, glitching. And on the screen, the open door was darker than before. The shadows inside weren't just shadows anymore. They were moving. No one spoke. That we stood there, frozen, staring at the open door, at the darkness inside. Rachel whispered, "Did you see that?" Kyle swallowed hard. "See what?" She didn't answer. because we all saw it now. Inside the room, something was moving. Suddenly, crash! An IV stand toppled over, slamming against the ground, and the noise echoed through the hallway. Rachel jumped back. Screw this. I'm leaving. Kyle grabbed her wrist. Wait. We need to see what's inside. She turned to him, her face pale. Are you insane? Kyle ignored her. He lifted his phone camera, aiming it at the darkness. Kyle's phone screen glitched. For a second, the image was distorted. Then the camera focused. And there it was. A shadow. Not just a shadow. It was tall, motionless, featureless, standing in the middle of the room. Not moving, but watching. Then the phone screen went black. A breath, not ours. It came from inside the room, from right next to us. And then something whispered our names. Something had been dragged. That was the first thing we noticed. A long dark streak ran from inside the room, stretching out into the hallway. It was thick, wet, fresh. Kyle took a step closer. What is that? Rachel shook her head. I don't want to know. We should have left. But instead, we looked inside. The overhead lights flickered violently. Quite for a second, the whole room went dark. And in that darkness, when something moved, a scraping sound echoed through the room, like something was dragging itself across the floor. But we didn't see anything. At least not with our eyes. Rachel pointed at the security camera. It was glitching badly. On the screen behind us, there was someone standing there. But when we turned around, nothing. Just the empty hallway. But the security feed still showed it, standing right behind us. Something was behind us, not just one thing, but many. Watching, waiting. Kyle lifted his phone, checking the security feed again. And then he froze. His breath hitched. Guys, he whispered, look at this. He turned the screen toward us, and that's when I saw them. Figures, lining the hallway behind us. Dozens of them, standing perfectly still, not too still. Rachel spun around. The hallway was empty. No figures, no movement. But when we looked back at the screen, they were still there, standing right behind us, closer than before. Then we heard it. Footsteps. Not ours. Slow, measured, getting closer. Rachel grabbed my wrist. Run. Kyle was still staring at the screen, his face pale. They're moving, he whispered. They're getting closer. Then to our left, a door creaked open. Inside, it was nothing. Not darkness, just emptiness. A void stretching forever. That's when a hand gripped the doorframe. Black, thin, wrong. It twitched, and before we could scream, it disappeared. Kyle held up his phone, checking the security feed, and then he froze. His face turned pale. "Guys," he whispered, "we're not alone." On the screen, shadowy figures were running beside us, dozens of them. But when we looked around, there was nothing. We stopped running, not because we had escaped, but because we were back where we started. The same hallway, the same overturned wheelchair, the same open door. Like we had never moved at all. Rachel grabbed my arm. Tell me I'm imagining this. Kyle turned in circles, his face pale. This isn't possible. But it was. And the worst part? The dark streak on the floor had grown. It stretched further down the hallway now, leading into the darkness. Like something had been dragged deeper inside. Then the lights flickered violently. For a split second, the hallway turned pitch black, and in that instant, we heard it, a whisper, right behind us. A chuckle, soft, amused, not coming from the speakers, not from any of us, but from inside the hallway, right where we had just been. Kyle lifted his phone, checking the security feed. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. Because on the screen, they were closer. The figures, the shadows, now standing directly behind us, and they were smiling. The door opened. Fully this time. And something stepped out. Tall, unnatural, wrong. Not walking, not floating. It just appeared. The overhead light surged, casting chaotic shadows on the wall. Each time the lights flickered, its shape changed, like reality was glitching around it. It breathed, not like a person, not like an animal, but like something trying to remember how. Then it moved. Slow, deliberate, toward us. Rachel grabbed my wrist. "Don't move, don't make a sound." Kyle was shaking, his phone still in his hand. "The camera," he whispered. "It's showing something else." On the screen, the hallway wasn't empty. It was filled with figures, pale, thin, wearing hospital gowns, standing in the shadows, watching us. And when the screen flickered again, they were smiling. We weren't breathing, we weren't moving, because if we did, it would see us, even though it had no eyes, even though it had no face at all. The hallway flickered. For a fraction of a second, everything went dark. And when the lights came back on, it had moved closer. A whisper, not from any of us, not from the hallway. It was coming from inside our heads, speaking words we couldn't understand. But somehow, we knew what it was saying. It was saying, "Run." It took another step. Not walking, not floating, just appearing closer. Every time the light flickered, it shifted forward. We didn't move. We didn't breathe. Because we knew. If we moved, it would move too. Kyle was the first to break. He lifted his phone, checking the security feed. His face turned white. There's more than one. We all turned toward the screen and saw them. Not just one shadowy figure, but dozens, lining the hallway, watching us, waiting. And then, in a flicker of static, they all took a step forward. We ran, but no matter how far we moved, as the hallway stretched on forever. Every door we passed looked the same. Every light flicker made the shadows grow longer. And every time we thought we were making progress, we ended up right back where we started. "This isn't real," Rachel screamed. "We're trapped." Kyle kept running, panting heavily. "There has to be a way out." I wanted to believe him, but deep down, I knew. We weren't running toward the exit. We were running in circles. Then ahead of us, a door swung open. Not slowly, not like before. This time it slammed against the wall, waiting for us. And inside wasn't just another room. Inside was darkness. A living, breathing void. And then the whispering came. Low, twisted. Not from behind us, not from the shadows. It was coming from inside the darkness. "Come inside. You don't have a choice. You were never meant to leave." Kyle lifted his phone, staring at the security feed. His hands were shaking. "Guys," he whispered, "look." We all turned to the screen, and in that moment, we saw it. Not just one figure, not just two, but dozens, lining the hallway, standing perfectly still, watching, waiting. And then, in a flicker of static, they all turned toward us. The moment I turned around, he was already gone. 1 second, he was there right next to us. The next, and he was vanishing into the darkness, being dragged inside. "Help me!" His scream was cut short, like something had just silenced him. Rachel lunged forward, reaching for him, but the darkness swallowed him whole. The door slammed shut, locking him inside. Kyle ran forward, slamming his fists against it. "Open the door, let him go." But there was no answer, no sound, nothing, like he had never existed. Then, the walls shifted. The hallway was moving, stretching, changing, like the hospital was breathing. We were inside something alive, and it wasn't letting us go. Kyle turned his phone toward us, showing the security feed. His hands were shaking. "Look," he whispered. The screen was static, glitching. And then, just for a second, it cleared. And we saw them, hundreds of them, standing in the shadows, waiting. And then, from inside the darkness, the voice came again. "One of you must stay." The door wasn't there before, but now it was wide open. And inside it, the lights were on. A surgical room. The walls were lined with rusted medical tools. An old operating table sat in the center. Dark stains covered the surface. Blood, dried, old, or maybe fresh. Kyle took a step forward. This doesn't make sense," he whispered. Rachel grabbed his arm. "Don't go in there." But then, he started moving. Not walking, not stepping, just drifting forward, like something was pulling him inside. Then, the breathing started. Not from Kyle, not from us. From inside the room, low, raspy, like something had been waiting. Kyle's phone screen glitched violently. The security feed had changed. Now the figures weren't in the hallway anymore. They were in the room, standing around the operating table. And when the screen flickered again, they were looking at us. Kyle was on the table, lying perfectly still. His eyes were open, but he wasn't moving. He wasn't blinking, like he was already gone. The surgical tray beside him was covered in tools. Rusty scalpels, forceps, bone saws. This wasn't just an old operating room. It was still in use. Then the figures moved. Slow, too slow. They weren't alive. They weren't ghosts. They were something else. They surrounded Kyle, watching, waiting. And then, one of them lifted a scalpel. Rachel screamed, "We have to get him out." I grabbed his arm, shaking him on. "Kyle, wake up!" But he didn't respond. He didn't even flinch. And then he smiled. "He's already gone," a voice whispered. It wasn't Kyle's voice. It wasn't anyone's voice. It came from everywhere. Rachel took a step back, shaking her head. No, this isn't real. But it was. And when the security feed flickered one last time, we saw the truth. Kyle had never been on the table. He had been watching us from the shadows the entire time. Smiling. Waiting. The next day, the hospital was empty again. No signs of anyone being there. No footprints, no equipment moved. No Kyle. Rachel and I never spoke about what happened. But sometimes, late at night, I check the security feed. And there he is, standing at the end of the hallway, watching, waiting,